Welcome to Fortune Forecast, and hey, how about The Untroubled Mind by Herbert J. Hall? That is the new book that we are reading here on the channel. I am Daisy, your hostess. If you're new to my channel, welcome, and to our Fortune community, welcome back. This book was written in 1915. It is in the public domain. It was published by Boston and New York Houghton Mifflin Company. So, what is my takeaway from the previous chapter? I thought that thinking too much was the greatest takeaway for me. I don't know about you, but I've noticed when my mind is occupied with too much stuff, it's almost like I don't have room to process the present moment that's happening here. And I believe that a tormented mind is one that is missing out on the present. So yes, I do agree that when we think too much, it does give us the untroubled mind. And from the previous chapter, one of the things that Mr. Hall said was that the busy unconscious mind does its best work in the serenity of an atmosphere that does not interfere and confuse. I will take a minute to share my observations about that particular statement. And if you're ready to jump into the next chapter, please go to the description and hit that timestamp and it'll take you right there. Otherwise, sit back as I share my thoughts. On the channel in our book playlist, I have two books that are worthy of you taking some time to look at. One of them is by Janet Young. The title is The Subconscious Mind and Its Illuminating Light. And the other one is titled Thought, Vibration, or the Law of Attraction by William Walker Atkinson. I bring these two up in reference to this statement that Mr. Hall said, the busy unconscious mind. So we have the subconscious mind, as you'll hear later in some of these other books, which is defined by that part that is deep, deep within our recess. It is said that 95% of our brain power handles everything our body needs to function properly, from eating, breathing, and digesting, etc. But that unconscious mind, what is that? Well, according to Sigmund Freud, these are the thoughts, the feelings, and the urges that are outside of our awareness. This could be said of things that are what we'd call internal programming of the person itself, our feelings and emotions. You might find that a lot can be learned from some of these authors that I do have on our playlist here. So imagine that your conscious mind is busy focusing on what you're focusing on. What is your unconscious mind focusing on if you are busy focusing on what you're focusing on? If, according to Mr. Hall, the busy unconscious mind does its best work in the serenity of an atmosphere that does not interfere and confuse it. So I do believe that some of great power can be obtained by consciously turning the volume down in your head and bringing things into a state of peace, where in that peace, there's a lot of common things happening consciously and unconsciously, leaving room for growth and possibly a filtration of the subconscious to operate for you in your life. That's just my observation. I don't know. I'd love to hear your comments. Please do let me know you were here and share your thoughts on that. All right, let me not delay any longer. Let's jump on to Chapter 5, Rules of the Game, and the author starts with 3 quotes. The first one is by Ben Jonson. It is not growing like a tree in bulk doth make man better be. End quote. The second one is from Theodore Roosevelt. It is a good thing to have a sound body, better to have a sane mind, but neither is to be compared to the aggregate of virile and decent qualities, which we call character. End quote. And a quote by Petrarch. The only effective remedy against inexorable necessity is to yield to it. End quote. When I go about among my patients, most of them, as it happens, nervously sick, I sometimes stop to consider why it is they are ill. I know that some are so because of physical weakness over which they have no control, that some are suffering from the effects of carelessness, and more from simple ignorance of the rules of the game. There are so many rules that no one will ever know them all. But it seems that we live in a world of laws, and that if we transgress those laws by ever so little, we must suffer equally. Whether our transgression is a mistake or not, and whether we happen to be saints or sinners. There are laws also which have to do with the recovery of poise and balance when these have been lost. These laws are less well observed and understood than those which determine our downfall. The more gross illnesses from accident, contagion, and malignancy we need not consider here, but only those intangible injuries that disable people who are relatively sound in the physical sense. It is true that nervous troubles may cause physical complications and that physical disease very often coexists with nervous illness. But it is better for us now to make an artificial separation. Just what happens in the human economy when a nervous breakdown comes, nobody seems to know, but mind and body cooperate to make the patient miserable and helpless. It may be nature's way of holding us up and preventing further injury. The holdup is severe, usually, and becomes in itself a thing to be managed. The rules we have wittingly or unwittingly broken are often unknown to us, but they exist in the all-wise providence, and we may guess by our own suffering how far we have overstepped them. If a man runs into a door in the dark, we know all about that. The case is simple. But if he runs over time at his office and hastens to be rich with the result of nervous dyspepsia, that is a mystery. Here is a girl who came out last year. She was apparently strong and her mother was ambitious for her social progress. That meant 4 nights a week for several months at dances and dinners, getting home at 3 a.m. or later. It was gay and delightful while it lasted, but it could not last. And the girl went to pieces suddenly. Her back gave out because it was not strong enough to stand the dancing and the long continued physical strain. The nerves gave out because she did not give her faculties time to rest, and perhaps because of a love affair that supervened. The result was a year of invalidism, and then, because the rules of recovery were not understood, several years more of convalescence. Such common rules should be well enough understood, but they are broken everywhere by the wisest people. The common case of the broken down schoolteacher is more unfortunate. This tragedy and others like it are more often, I believe, due to unwise choice of profession in the first place. The women colleges are turning out hundreds of young women every year who naturally consider teaching as the field most appropriate and available. Probably only a very small proportion of these girls are strong enough physically or nervously to meet the growing demands of the schools. They may do well for a time, some of them unusually well, for it is the sensitive, high-strung organism that is appreciative and effective. After a while, the worry and fret of the requirements and the constant nag of the schoolroom have their effect upon those who are foredoomed to failure in that particular field. The plight of such young women is particularly hard, for they are usually dependent upon their work. It is, after all, not so much the things we do as the way we do them and what we think about them that accomplishes nervous harm. Strangely enough, The sense of effort and the feeling of our own inadequacy damage the nervous system quite as much as the actual physical effort. The attempt to catch up with life and with affairs that go on too fast for us is a frequent and harmful deflection from the rules of the game. Few of us avoid it. Life comes at us and goes by very fast. Tasks multiply and we are inadequate. Responsibilities increase before we are ready. They bring fatigue and confusion. We cannot shirk and be true. Having done all you reasonably can, stop, whatever may be the consequences. That is a rule I would enforce if I could. To do more is to drag and fail, so defeating the end of your efforts. If it turns out that you are not fit for the job you have undertaken, give it up and find another, or modify that one until it comes within your capacity. It takes courage to do this, more courage sometimes than is needed to make us stick to the thing we're doing. Rarely, however, will it be necessary for us to give up if we will undertake and consider for the day only such part of our task as we are able to perform. The trouble is that we look at our work or our responsibility all in one piece, and it crushes us. If we cannot arrange our lives so that we may meet their obligations a little at a time, then we must admit failure and try again on what may seem a lower plane. That is what I consider the brave thing to do. I would honor the factory superintendent who, finding himself unequal to his position, should choose to work at the bench where he could succeed perfectly. The habit of uncertainty in thought and action, bred, as it sometimes is, from a lack of faith in man and in God, is nevertheless a thing to be dealt with sometimes by itself. Not infrequently it is a pretty habit that can be corrected by the exercise of a little willpower. I believe it is better to decide wrong a great many times, doing it quickly, than to come to a right decision after weakly vacillating. As a matter of fact, we may trust our decisions to be fair and true if our life's ideals are beautiful and true. We may improve our indecisions a great deal by mastering their unhappy details, but we shall not finally overcome them until life rings true and until all our acts and thoughts become the solid and inevitable expression of a healthy, growing regard for the best in life, a call to right living that is no mean dictum of policy, but which is renewed every morning as the sun comes out of the sea. However inconsequential the habit of indecision may seem, it is really one of the most disabling of bad habits. Its continuance contributes largely to the sum of nervous exhaustion. Whatever its origin, whether it stands in the relation of cause or effect, it is an indulgence that insidiously takes the snap and sparkle out of life and leaves us for the time being colorless and weak. Next to uncertainty, an uninspired certainty is wrecking to the best of human prospects. The man whose one idea is of making himself and his family materially comfortable or even rich may not be coming to nervous prostration, but he is courting a moral prostration that will deny him all the real riches of life and that will in the end reward him with a troubled mind, a great unsatisfied longing, unless, to be sure, he is too smug and satisfied to long for anything. The larger life leads us inevitably away from ourselves, away from the super requirements of our families. It demands of them and of ourselves an unselfishness that is born of a love that finds its expression in the service of God. And what is the service of God if it is not such and entering into the divine purposes and spirit that we become with God recreators in the world, working factors in the higher evolution of humanity. While we live, we shall get and save, we shall use and spend, we shall serve the needs of those dependent upon us, but we shall not line the family nest so softly that our children become powerless. We shall not confine our charities to the specified channels, where our names will be praised and our credit increased. We shall give and serve in secret places with our hearts in our deeds. Then we may possess the untroubled mind, a treasure too rich to be computed. We shall not have it for the seeking. It may exist in the midst of what men may call privations and sorrows, but it will exist in a very large sense, and it will be ours. The so-called hard-headed businessman who never allows himself to be taken advantage of, whose dealings are always strict and uncompromising, is very apt to be a particularly miserable invalid when he is ill. I cannot argue in favor of business laxity. I know the imperative need of exactness and finality, but I do believe that if we are to possess the untroubled mind, we must make our lives larger than the field of dollars and cents. The charity that develops in us will make us truly generous and free from the reaction of hardness. It is a great temptation to go on multiplying the rules of the game. There are so many sensible and necessary pieces of advice which we all need to have emphasized. That is the course we must try to avoid. The child needs to be told arbitrarily for a while what is right and what is wrong, that he must do this and that he must not do that. The time comes, however, when the growing instinct toward right living is the thing to foster, not the details of life which will inevitably take care of themselves if the underlying principle is made right. It must be the ideal of moral teaching to make clear and pure the source of action. Then the stream will be clear and pure. Such a stream will purify itself and neutralize the dangerous inflow along its banks. It is true that great harm may come from the polluted inflows, but they will be less and less harmful as the increasing current from the good source flows down. We shall have to look well to our habits, lest serious ills befall. But that must never be the main concern, or we shall find ourselves living very narrow and labored lives. We shall find that we are failing to observe one of the most important rules of the game. This is the end of chapter 5. Stay here with me as we're going to roll on right through the next chapter. So please do take a minute and help me with the YouTube algorithm. Hit that like button. If you're interested in like the channel, subscribe and hit the bell. That way you'll get notified when I put up the next video. And leave me your comments. I'd love to read them and know that you are here. All right, right on to chapter 6, The Nervous Temperament. We start off with 3 quotes. The first one is from Browning. Beyond the ugly actual, lo on every side, imagination's limitless domain. End quote. Quote by Samuel Johnson. He that too much refines his delicacy will always endanger his quiet. End quote. A quote by Stevenson. The great refinement of many poetical gentlemen has rendered them practically unfit for the jostling and ugliness of life. End quote. It has been my fortune as a physician to deal much with the so-called nervous temperament. I have come both to fear and to love it. It is the essence of all that is bright, imaginative, and fine, but it is as unstable as water. Those who possess it must suffer. It is their lot to feel deeply and very often to be misunderstood by their more practical friends. All their lives these people will shed tears of joy and more tears of sorrow. I would like to write of their joy, of the perfect satisfaction, the true happiness that comes in creating new and beautiful things, of the deep pleasure they have in the appreciation of good work in others. But with the instinct of a dog trained for a certain kind of hunting, I find myself turning to the misfortuned and the ills. The very keenness of perception makes painful anything short of perfection. What will such people do in our clanging streets? What if those fine ears tuned to the most exquisite appreciation of sweet sound? What of that refinement of hearing that detects the least departure from the rhythm and pitch in complex orchestral music? And must they bear the crash of steel on stone, the infernal clatter of traffic? Well, yes, as a matter of fact, they must, at least for a good many years to come, until advancing civilization eliminates the city noise. But it is not always the great noises that disturb and distract. There is a story told of a woman who became so sensitive to noise that she had her house made soundproof. There were thick carpets and softly closing doors. Everything was padded. The house was set back from a quiet street, but that street was strewn with tan bark to check the sound of carriages. Surely, here was bliss for the sensitive soul. I need not tell the rest of the story, how absolutely necessary noises became intolerable, and the poor woman ended by keeping a man on the place to catch and silence the tree toads and crickets. There is nothing to excuse careless and unnecessary noises of the world. We shall dispose of them finally as we are disposing of flamboyant signboards and typhoid flies. But meanwhile, and always for that matter, the sensitive soul must learn to adjust itself to circumstances and conditions. This adjustment may in itself become a fine art. It is really the art by which the painter excludes the commonplace and irrelevant from his landscape. Sometimes we have to do this consciously. For the most part, it should be a natural, unconscious selection. I am sure it is unwise to attempt at any time the dulling of the appreciative sense of the sake of peace and comfort. Love and understanding of the beautiful and true is too rare and fine a thing to be lost or diminished under any circumstances. The cure, as I see it, is to be found in the cultivation of the faculty that finds some good in everything and everybody. This is the saving grace. It takes great bulks of commonplace and distills from the mass a few drops of precious essence. It finds in the unscholarly and the imperfect rare traces of good. It sees in man, any man, the image of God, to be justified and made evident only in the sublimity of death, perhaps, but usually to be developed in life. The nervous person is often morose and unsocial, perhaps because he is not understood, perhaps because he falls so short of his own ideals. Often, he does not find kindred spirits anywhere. I do not think we should drive such a man into conditions that hurt, but I do believe that if he is truly artistic and not a snob, he may lead himself into a larger social life without too much sacrifice. The sensitive, high-strung spirit that does not give of its own best qualities to the world of its acquaintance, that does not express itself in some concrete way, is always in danger of harm. Such a spirit turned in upon itself is a consuming fire. The spirit will burn a long time and suffer much if it does not use its heat to warm and comfort the world of need. Real illness makes the nervous temperament a much more formidable difficulty. All the sensitive faculties are more sensitive. Irritability becomes an obsession and idleness a terror. The nervous temperament under irritation is very prone to become selfish and very likely to hide behind this selfishness, calling it temperament. The man who flies into a passion when he is disturbed, or who spends his days in torment from the noises of the street, the woman of high attainment who has retired into herself, who is moody and unresponsive, these unfortunates have virtually built a wall about their lives, a wall which shuts out the world of life and happiness. From the walls of this prison, the sounds of discord and annoyance are thrown back upon the prisoner, intensified and multiplied. The wall is real enough in its effect, but will cease to exist when the prisoner begins to go outside, when he begins to realize his selfishness and his mistake. Then the noises and the irritations will be lost in the wider world that is open to him. After all, it is only through unselfish service in the world of men that this broadening can come. There is no lack of opportunity for service. Perhaps the simplest and most available form of service is charity, the big, professional kind, of course, and beyond that, the greater field of intimate and personal charity. I know a girl of talent and ability, herself a nervous invalid, sick and helpless for the lack of a little money which would give her a chance to get well. I do not mean money for luxuries, for foolish indulgences, but money to buy opportunity, money that would lift her out of the heavy morass of poverty and give her a chance. She falls outside the beaten path of charity. She is not reached by the usual philanthropies. I also know plenty of people who could help that girl without great sacrifice. They will not do it because they give money to the regular charities. They will not do it because sometimes generosity has been abused. So they miss the chance of broadening and developing their own lives. I know well enough that objective interest can rarely be forced. It must usually come the other way about, through the broadening of life which makes it inevitable. Sometimes I wish I could force that kind of development, that kind of charity. Sometimes I long to take the rich neurasthenic and make him help his brother, make him develop a new art that shall save people from sorrow and loss. We are all together in this world, and all kin. To recognize it and to serve the needs of the unfortunate as we would serve our own children is the remedy for many ills. It is the new art, the final and greatest of all artistic achievements. It warms our hearts and opens our lives to all that is wholesome and good. This is one of the crises in which my theory of inspiration first may fail. Here the charity may have to come first, may have to be insisted upon before there can be any inspiration or any further joy in life. It is not always charity in the usual sense that is required. Sometimes the charity that gives something besides money is best. But charity in any good sense means self-forgetfulness, and that is a long way on the road to nervous health. Give of yourself, give of your substance, and you will cease to be troubled with the penalties of selfishness. Then take the next step that gives not because life has come back, but because the world has become larger and warmer and happier. When the giver gives of his sympathy and of his means because he wants to, not because he has to do so, he will begin to know what I mean when I say it is better to have the inspiration first. End of chapter 6. All right, let's head over to the next video and I'll be there with the next chapter.